welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. This is the place where we take a no bullshit look at life's little lessons. Here, together, we find the spiritual glory in even the most wicked hard story. This is a journey from fear back to love and how we can find our greatest strength and happiness in some of the most unlikely places. I believe that if you're willing to change your mind, you can totally change your life. So, are you ready to rewrite your story and choose to live free? Let's do this. Hey, you guys, and welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I am so wicked excited right now, you guys. I am literally talking to one of my favorite people on the planet. And I already warned Andre, who I often call AD3. I already warned him, Andre Dubus III, that he's going to have to just sit for a minute and listen to me gush. But before I kind of get into the personal parts of it, I'm just going to bring you guys up to speed. Some of you, obviously, if you're a reader, if you're a lover of words and books, then you already know who my esteemed guest is. But for those of you who maybe don't, let me just tell you a little bit about him and why he's so awesome. Okay. So Andre Dubus III is the author of, and I have a bunch of his books over here next to me. I'll be flashing these suckers later. I got a few of them over here. He is the author of The Cage Keeper and Other Stories, Bluesman. I've got both of these right here, Bluesman. And the New York Times bestseller, The House of Sand and Fog, The Garden of Last Days, and his memoir, Townie, which you guys, come on, all right? We're going to talk about that. And it was a #4 New York Times bestseller and a New York Times editor choice. His work has been included in so many things, it's ridiculous, but the best American essays, the best spiritual writing anthologies, and House of Sand and Fog, which I already mentioned. Not only was it an Oprah Book Club pick, which again, another great story around that. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller. It won a National Book Award. It was made into an Academy Award nominated film starring Ben Kingsley and Jennifer Connelly. And I'll just have to say, sidebar, it's so fascinating to me now that when I saw that movie, I did not know you. And now knowing you and knowing what I know about that movie, it's just one of those moments in your life. I remember that movie like gutted me. And now knowing you and your brilliance totally makes sense. His 2013 novella collection, which is Dirty Love, which I got that one right here too, so you guys can see them. All right, this is a good one too. It was a notable book by the Washington Post, the New York Times. It was named a New York Times editor choice and a Kirkus Starred Best Book of 2013. And his newest novel, this sucker right here, Gone So Long, published in October 2018. And I kind of felt like it was a birthday present to me because it came out in my birthday month, and I really appreciated that. Thanks, Andre. This one was received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Library Journal. It was named on the top of best book lists, including the Boston Globe, 20 best books of 2018, and on and on and on. He's won a Guggenheim. He's won the National Magazine Award for Fiction. He's won not one, but 2 Pushcart Prizes and an American Academy of Arts Letters Award in Literature. He is a full-time teacher at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. He lives with his beautiful wife, Fontaine, who I love and we'll talk about, and his 3 kids. Okay, that's the official bio. Hi, Andre.
Hi, Karen.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And you guys, I'm wearing this shirt today because it's my masshole shirt. And you'll see right on here, it says Townie Attitude. And it's a little nod to my beautiful friend and writer, Andre. And here's the thing, you guys, you know this story. You know this show is all about like storytelling and spirituality. And moving from our story to our glory, about how the things that happen to us, while they might inform us and influence us and inspire us, they don't have to define us, meaning like the wicked hard shit that we go through. And it's interesting because I recently read a description that somebody said about you, which I'm going to read to you. And it's going to lead into like maybe one of my first questions. And I'm going to let you talk for a second. I'm going to shut my big mouth and let you talk. So in writing hard stories, you remember this one?
I do.
Melanie Brooks. So Melanie described you like this. She said, as she was waiting to talk to you, he has dark wavy hair salted with traces of gray, a strong jaw, kind eyes, and a ready smile. This is the part I want to kind of get into. He projects an air of self-assurance, but not arrogance, an effortless charisma that warrants attention. But here's the thing. You weren't always that way, right? As a kid, there was this transformation that happened to you. So can we kind of talk about that origin story of like kid from Haverhill, like the fighter to the writer? Can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Karen, I'm such a fan of you, so
Aw.
thank you for having me. No, you are one of my favorite people on the planet, and I know a lot of people, as you. Well, look, I won't go on and on, but before I get to the fighter, I have to get to the little boy I was. It's interesting. I just turned 61 last week or 2 weeks.
Yes, you did. September 11th.
Weird, and the older I get, strangely, the easier it is to remember being a kid. I don't know what that's about. Something's going on there. Anyway, I feel like I'm more in touch with the boy I always was. Maybe because I'm not trying to not be that kid anymore. So, look, I'm the son of a great short story writer of the same name, which is why I have that clunky 3. I don't really like all my names. I'm the son of the great short story writer Andre Dubus. My mom and dad eloped from Louisiana when they were 18 and 20. All my family, my mom, dad, everybody's from Louisiana.
Wow.
My dad was a Marine captain. He left the Marines and got into the Iowa Writers Workshop in Iowa. After he got his MFA, he got his first teaching job at the now defunct Bradford Junior College, which became Bradford College. And that's how he got to New England. That's how he got to this neck of the woods because of his teaching job.
Yeah.
And this is the late '60s. He was a full-time professor, but he was making $7,000 a year. 7,000. Now that was a lot more in the '60s than it is now, but it sure wasn't much for a family of 6. So we were living in, I remember, it's just so clear in my whole body. We lived in this uninsulated summer camp all year long on this pond in New Hampshire.
Mm.
And we loved it because we were kids and we were on a pond in the woods. But my parents' marriage quickly ended. They were only married 9 or 10 years. And I watched my mother do what far too many single women do. She had to pick up and take over. And when when she was going to elope with my old man, she went to her grandfather, who was a third grade educated pipe fitter, and she said, she told him she was eloping with this guy Andre Dubus from Lafayette, Louisiana. And my grandfather said, well, there ain't been no damn divorces in this family, and if this don't work out, you ain't coming home. And so 9 years later, it did not work out. So because of what she said to him, what he said to her, there's no way she's going to pack and go home. And by the way, we didn't have a car for the first few weeks. My parents owned one car. My dad needed it to teach. So I watched my mom get a job as a nurse's aide and a waitress. She started to work her way through school, and she ended up getting a degree in social services, which she worked in social services her whole adult life.
Mm-hmm.
But we were a strange family in that we had a house full of books, but we remember the educated working poor. I mean, we moved two to three times a year for cheaper rent.
Yeah.
I mainly grew up on the Merrimack River in these mill towns. I was a little kid. I was a small guy, little bones, and I would use adverbs in daily speech. Hey, Dubus, want to hit off this joint? Not necessarily. Boom! I get punched in the face, and I got beat up a lot. Kids are mean when you're
Yeah, they are brutal.
And I can look back sometimes with dark comedy about like using adverbs and getting punched in the face. And you and I have talked about this. When I look back at even now I can feel it sitting here in this chair. I had 2 predominant emotions in my daily life as a kid. One was physical fear, and 2 was just self-loathing. I just hated who I was. And I hated who I was because I was small and scared and I was a physical coward. I would just, if you know violence, and sadly far too many people do, you either run like hell, you fight like hell, or you freeze. And whenever I was in a fight situation, I'm usually just looking at the kid the wrong way, and then before I know it, I'm on the ground getting kicked in the face, I would freeze. And it took years to figure out why I froze instead of, I didn't even run, I just froze. And writing my my accidental memoir Townie helped me to actually get some insight on what the freezing was about. It's all, it's a fear response, but also in my case, I was still trying to rationalize and figure out, why is this guy punching me in the face? I didn't do
Yes.
anything to him. Why is he hurting me? And years later, and I think you and I have talked about this too, Karen. I was reading a horrible, I mean, a really good news story, but about the Tiananmen Square massacre, which you don't talk about as a world anymore, which is a crime. I still think it's a crime that we took part in the Beijing Olympics, frankly, because we've forgotten those brave, beautiful kids who tried to bring about democratic reforms in the summer of '89 in Beijing. The dictatorship put up with it for a few weeks and then massacred them, rolled them over with tanks, shot them to death.
Mm.
It's been totally excised from Chinese history. Interestingly, they call it fake news, right?
Mm-hmm.
That,
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, I'm reading this description by a British BBC war correspondent who was in Tiananmen Square, and he describes one of the 23-year-old leaders getting shot in the chest by an approaching soldier. His 23-year-old girlfriend, who's also a leader in the movement, is screaming at the soldier who did it, who's also their age. They're just, the soldiers are kids of the farmers in the provinces. She's screaming, "Why? Why? Why?" And he shoots her in the head and kills her. And I remember reading this piece in the Times and weeping. But it
Yeah.
got me thinking about innocence. That maybe that's when you lose your innocence, when you just stop asking why to brutality. You just expect it. So then you either fucking start fighting like hell or running like hell. So, I got beat up a lot and a lot and a lot. And finally, something happened that changed my life. My brother was beaten really badly in front of me by a grown man, and I couldn't do anything I didn't protect him. I just froze again. And after that horrible beating, I actually went into the rented house my mother couldn't afford, and in Haverhill. It was like 1973, 74. So I'm about 14 years old. And I had long hair down on my waist because it was the '70s, and we all looked like rockers. And I looked at my 14-year-old face and I said, I don't care what happens to you anymore. I don't care if you get shot, killed, stabbed, your brain's kicked in. You are never gonna not fight back again. And that night I started to do push-ups and sit-ups. I got like 3 of each. I was in, terrible shape. But I began to lift weights. I began to work out. I began to box. And much to my surprise, I had boxing ability. And I became a vigilante is what I became. I to this day, I despise injustice. I despise cruelty. So therefore, I despise misogyny and homophobia and racism and any powerful lording over powerless.
Bullying.
Bullying. I despise bullying. And so, but for years, I would go look for bullies, and usually, tragically, this would be a man hitting a woman in a bar or a house party, and I'd put him in the hospital, or I try to. And and I was a far more effective fighter than I should have been because I'm not a tough guy. I was so insanely full of self-hatred that I would rather die a violent death than see a coward in the mirror ever again, which made me a very dangerous kid.
Yes.
The weird thing is, I got social rewards for this I didn't see coming. The local police love me because I'm wailing on these punks that they want to, but they can't without losing their badges. Women started to notice me. And what was heaven, like ambrosia from the gods for me, I went from being thought of as all the words you get called as a small coward, sissy, pussy, all these words, but, misogynistic bullshit anyway. But to, oh, watch out for Dubus. He's a tough kid. Nothing could be more beautiful to hear.
Sure. The ego like loves that.
Oh my God, it was like Academy Award, Nobel Prize, tough kid. Nothing could be better. Anyway, right? So,
Yeah.
so now I will get to writing. So we all
No,
have this.
I'm not rushing you. I love this. In fact, I wanted to just say that you called yourself, you went from victim to a victimizer of victims.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful, let me just read actually what you
Yeah,
actually
I went from victim to a victimizer of victimizers.
Oh,
No,
that's right. Victimizer of victimizers. Exactly. Sorry. Thank you for
I
correcting
mean, it
me.
was almost. I mean, you can almost put a cape and mask on me. And I got beat up a few times. Once, almost beaten to death by a much stronger, tougher guy. I got arrested a few times for disorderly and all that. But we all have this beautiful voice, and you and I have talked about this in depth. This quiet voice, and of course, this is your work is so much around this. This small, quiet voice that we should listen to. The word intuition from the Latin, this gives me goosebumps. It means to watch over or to guard.
Hmm.
And even though I was getting social rewards, even though I'd gone from being passive to active, my body went from being soft to hard. I went from not being able to do more than 5 sit-ups. I once did 1,000 sit-ups without stopping till my lower back was bleeding. I was in crazy condition, but I was also insane. All Despite all those rewards, a little voice inside me said, you're going to die doing this, or maybe worse than that, you might kill another human being.
Hmm.
You who say you hate violence, you could murder someone.
Yeah.
And so, as a way to control my violence, I said, well, okay, I know I'm not afraid to fight anymore. I'm just terrified not to fight. So I'm going to stay away from places where it's easy to find trouble. With that, it's easy to find someone, slapping his girlfriend or his wife, or big guy punching a little guy. Instead, I'm just going to box. So I'm good at it. So it'll be my sport. And so one night, and this is in Townie, as you know, my memoir, Townie. I'm living in Lynn, the city of sin.
And I have so many. You know how hard it is for a Lawrence kid to not fill in the blanks of the rest of that rhyme?
I know. Fill it in. How's it go? How's it
Well, there's
go?
a couple of them. There's one. It says the mothers say no, but the daughters give in. You never come out the same way you went in.
Oh
Like
my God.
there's so many.
Everybody from Lynn, I know, hates those things, so I try not to say it to a Lynn kid.
I don't. I just had to. I had like the Vicky with two K's from Lawrence, who I call my shadow self. Who she's often the first voice to speak. And of course, in Miracles, we say the ego speaks first, and it's always loudest. And I always add, and it's always wrong. But Vicky with two K's, she knows those rhymes in and out. So I just try to say to her, it's okay. You don't have to.
I love that. The ego speaks first, and it's always loudest. Did you make that up?
No, it's from A Course in Miracles, which is
I love that.
yeah, it speaks first, it's always loudest, and I add it's always wrong because
All right. Yeah. Okay. So perfect segue. So I got this little voice inside me saying, "Back off, man. Back off. Bad road." Even though, and let me just say, the thing that I learned most from those years of weight training and boxing, and changing my life, even though it led to, it was in the service of violence against other people. The truth is, I learned you can change your life. I didn't know that. So anyway, um, I'm living in Lynn. I'm working construction all day with my brother. I'm in my early 20s, and I'm training for the Golden Gloves down in Lowell, which sounds impressive. I just signed up, but I was really well in the training. It sounds really good. Yeah, he was training for the Golden Gloves. I didn't take part, but but I had every intention. I had my AAU number, and I was doing well in the training at the boys' club in Lynn. And anyway, one night, winter night, after a day of construction, I was getting ready to, 2 mile run to the gym, 2 hour workout, 2 mile run back, and something made me, to this day, I don't believe in God, but I believe in the divine.
I'm so happy. That's one of my things that I want to talk about later. We'll circle back to it, but this concept of writing as spiritual practice or whatever. But go ahead. Like I don't believe in God, but I believe in the divine. So something intervened on your behalf. Something I would call that spirit, right? I would say the part of your mind that was not fucking insane, or
Yeah.
the part of your mind, as I might say in spiritual mentoring work, is connected with God, source, divine, universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it. I never get hung up on the name, but the part of you that knew the true you
Yeah.
spoke to you, and for some reason there was enough of a pause where you were smart enough to sit your ass down and listen.
Yeah, and I don't know if I was smart, but I don't know. I just followed it. Thank God. But I say thank God. I don't believe that there is an entity as a God who knows my name or cares about me. I do believe that there is something beautiful and divine and mysterious in and around all of us human beings all at once. You know, that Hindi expression, namaste, the divine in me bows to the divine in you. I guess that's what I believe, that there's something beautiful in everyone, even the most fallen among us. It's hard
Yes.
to find some for some of us, but it's there. So anyway, so I was, long day of construction. I was really tired. I put on my sweats. I was getting ready to run. It was like 3 degrees out, and I was going to go. I mean, nothing stopped me from that kind of discomfort, but something made me sit my ass down at my little table, my little kitchen, get a piece of paper and a pencil, brew a cup of tea, and I started to write a scene from the point of view of a young woman losing her virginity to her boyfriend in his car in the woods in Maine. And I hadn't been reading much fiction. I don't know where it came from, but when I finished writing, I took a sip of the tea. It had been boiling, and now it's like room temperature. I thought I'd been writing for 10 minutes, but it's clearly, over an hour. And the thing is, I felt for the first time in my life, I felt like Andre. I said, oh, here you are. And I'm not saying that I wanted to be a writer then, but I knew that I had to keep doing this to be myself. And honestly, that's I've been writing 5, 6 days a week since that night in Lynn in 1983 or whatever it was for that feeling. The writer Thomas Williams was asked. I love what he said. Some journalists asked him, "Mr. Williams, why do you write?" He says, "Oh, that's easy. I write so that I don't die before I'm dead." And so
Mhm.
and by the way, almost immediately, so then it became a daily practice. I would get a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'd start writing scenes, and I'd start trying to get what was in me out. And almost immediately, I wanted to stop punching people in the face. I kept fighting for a few years. In the last fight I was in, some guy was beating up with his bare fists his wife on a corner of Newburyport, of all places, which is a little shishi town now, but it wasn't when I was growing up.
Yeah.
That's the last fight I was in. I, went after him. But my point is, writing saved my life. It got me
Yeah.
literally off the path of violence. It gave me another way to express myself. Um, but also, it taught me, Karen, that I've been looking at the world in a fundamentalist way, as in like a musical fundamentalist way, like no undertones and no overtones. Oh, you hit your girlfriend, you're bad. You should just be executed. What I still think is fucking horrendous, but I've learned to hate the sin and not the sinner. And
Yeah.
writing has taught me that. Writing has gotten me there. Nothing else has, really, I think, more than writing. Because how can you try to slip into the private experience of another human being with your pencil or pen or keyboard without it's a sustained act of empathy.
Well, I think, yeah. So what you're talking about, I talk about it like, and it's been interesting, right? So being the kid of a murdered mother, so violence has been a huge aspect of my life. Violence, being a kid growing up in Lawrence, Mass, Boston, Mass, but also nonviolence. It's not surprising that I choose a path of nonviolence as an adult because, of where I came from. But the thing that you're talking about, I think, um, in the role of forgiveness, because it was set upon me that I knew, and I don't know if I've ever told you this story, like my mother, I'm going to make my point to your point,
Oh, take your
but
time.
my mother started coming to me in dreams in my early 20s. And she said to me, I've forgiven him and now it's your turn.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I was screwed because, I came from eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And I came from a family of like, I was an Irish kid, but my step family, my stepfather, my Uncle Manny, my cousins, they were all like, Italian and Portuguese. And they were like into the whole like mafia thing. Like my Uncle Manny, like, had a handkerchief always. My father and my Uncle Manny, my grandfather all had handkerchiefs. And they were always like wiping their face and their mustaches and, like shirt collars undone down to here. And my Uncle Manny, when he was like in his 40s, like got a tattoo of an eye on the back of his shoulder. And I remember being at his house because he had like an above ground pool. He lived in Methuen, and we went over his house for a barbecue, a cookout or something. And I remember saying to him, Uncle Manny, why did you get a tattoo of an eyeball? I'm a little kid. And he's like, so when the bastards try to see me, like when the bastards try to stab me in the back, I see him coming, right? It's just like this whole thing. But
Wow.
yeah, so but when I was set upon to try to figure out how to forgive my mother's killer, and forgive, like you, like forgive myself and forgive just all the shit that kind of came with my mother's death, the way it just kind of blew up the whole family. My mother, I always say, like had this incredible gravitational pull that you could not resist. So
Mm.
when she died, it was like all the surrounding planets went flying out in all directions, and so again, what I'm trying to say is what I realized, that in order to forgive him, in order to do this deeper spiritual work to end my own suffering, as selfishly as it was, I had to meet him, and I had to meet everybody in my life with curiosity instead of judgment.
Yeah.
So that tone that you're talking about, it's almost like saying, well, that's red. And I'm like, yeah, well, there's also like tomato red and orangish red. And there's all these tones or notes in music, if you want to call it that, or hues of color, where we don't just get to say they're one thing, and I think that's what allowed me to forgive him, is when, it started with the poet Rumi, where he said, the wound is where the light comes in. And then Leonard Cohen changed it in his song that he's famous for. There's a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. And it was this momentary crack that when I don't think I've ever told you this story, and I don't want to tell the whole story, but I'll tell a little bit of it. Is when I was at BU my freshman year, I never told anybody this in my family, but I had a plan, right? Like, so I was suffering so much. I was suffering so much because nobody in my family talked about what happened to my mother. And so I didn't really understand. Like, how you always say, like, I know what happened. I know she was beaten to death. Like, I know what happened, but like, what the hell happened?
Right.
And so I was trying to make sense of this senseless
Information versus experience.
Right. And it was like trying to make sense of a senseless thing. And I think that's the part that I really relate to when you were talking about that little boy who you're like, I think, you were talking about the 3 F's, fight, flight, or freeze. And there's now a new one, a fourth one, and it's called to fawn. And it means that you kind of go along with the person in power to keep yourself from getting harmed. And I did a combination of fawning as a child when I was little, and then I started fighting. And I didn't necessarily fight with my dukes, but I had my dukes up. Like, I became a fighter. I became very tough, right? So when I kind of just like think about this, so
Hmm.
I'm a freshman at BU, and I don't know anything about this guy, like why it happened. So I had determined, I was like, okay, when I turn 18, because for some reason I thought when I'm 18, they'll let me go do this thing, right? This is my story. I'm so stupid, but I'm like, when I'm 18, I'm going to go to the
Not
prison.
stupid.
No, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I had made this story in my head of like this, and this like believing that once I knew why he did it or what happened that night, then I would have peace, right? So I was looking for this answer outside of myself, and I was like, well, I'm going to go to the prison, and I'm going to sit down eye to eye, and I'm going to ask this guy, like, why did you do it? Like, what happened that night, right? And so I turned 18 in October. Now it's December, and I have my finals at BU. I don't have a phone in my room, so I'm like in the lobby, like quarters, like calling my boyfriend, calling whatever, and just checking in with him. So I was so terrified that, remember one time you and I had a conversation. It was at Southern New Hampshire University. You were there for Writers' Day. I think it was the day you were doing the keynote speech, and you were wearing like your cowboy boots. Like, I don't know all your clothes, but like I know you're like, I'm here as the writer speaking clothes. And so you have this jacket you wear and the button down, the jeans and the boots, right? And so I'm looking at you in this jacket, and we were talking about that, and you said something like, and you can correct me if you remember and I'm wrong, yeah, I think sometimes that I wear this jacket to like kind of prove that I belong here or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
there's this concept of ourselves, right? Of like, maybe they'll take me more seriously or whatever wearing wearing this thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I thought it was really interesting. So I don't know where I was going with that,
It
but
was the shame of the former poor kid.
yeah,
I never owned a jacket till I never put a suit jacket on my body till I was 25, and my wealthy girlfriend bought me one.
Right.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But continue.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was like, checking in. I was checking in with my boyfriend. Oh, I know where I was going with that. Cause like you, I was terrified I was going to flunk out of college. Like I was terrified. And I got there my first year at BU, which was like $24,000. I paid for with the money that I got from my dead mother's insurance policy. So like no pressure, right? Like no pressure.
Oh my,
Like,
I
oh my
never.
God, if I
Wow.
if I mess up, I'm screwed, right? What am I gonna do? So I like made Dean's list, right? I was trying so hard to not be dumb, right? I was like, so all I did was like head in the book. So I take a study break and I go downstairs and I call my boyfriend at the time. His name is, well, his real name is Francis. Everybody calls him Buddy, but I always call him Francis. So, I call him and he picks up the phone, and he was always a sweet kid. He was younger than me, but he was being too nice. That's suspiciously nice. And I remember saying to him, like, all right, Francis, what's going on? And he's like, and he's like, Carvo is dead. And I'm like, my whole plan was I was going to get the answers and I was going to finally have peace. And now, and I just said, what the fuck do you mean Carvo is dead? And he said, and here, I'll show you. I got a picture.
Jesus.
So that's him.
Mm.
So I was like, I'm like, and when I was like, what? And I said, when? And he said, because I'm in Boston, right? They're in Lawrence. He says, 3 days ago. And like, I lose it. What the fuck? And he's like, hey, you were studying. We didn't want it. And I was like, boom. And I slammed down the payphone, dig in my pocket. Boom. Remember when you used to have to memorize phone numbers?
Yeah.
So I pull, boom, to this day, I remember this number. I dial my sister, 603-329-5176, boom. And my sister, before she can even, and when the fuck were you going to tell me? She knew exactly what I was talking about. Kay, we didn't want, he was at a boom. And like, I was just horrified that I wasn't going to get my chance to talk to him. I'm like, so the answer died with him. Now it's between like God, him, and my mother, and or whatever the divine is that knows the omnipotent view. And I was like, I was crushed. So, but here's what happened. I go to my stepfather's house. So like a few days later now, finals are over. I go home. And when I go home to Lawrence, it's like, I don't have a place to live, right? Because my aunt and uncle dropped me off at college day one. I lived with them for about 4 years. So day one at college, they dropped me off. I'm 17. I'm on my own. So it's like, nobody talked to me about the plan of like, well, on breaks and in the summer, like, where do you live now? Because you're a kid without a home, right? And I was like, So like I went home and we would like run around and see that one and see this one. I go to my stepfather's house. It's Christmas Eve and they can't see us. So my sister Kim and I come in the door and the Italians and the Portuguese, they can't see us yet where we're standing. And they're all around this table and it's like bottles of Crown Royal and calamari and the marinara sauce. And my Nana's over there. My Uncle Manny's over there. My father's over there. Everybody's doing their thing. And all of a sudden I hear like ding, 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 ding. My Uncle Manny's like, hey, assholes, shut up. So everybody gets quiet. And he's like, a toast. Everybody's got their booze, right? And he goes, to Paul Caravo, may that cocksucker rot in hell. Salute. And everybody cheers. And it's in that moment when I realize I don't feel the same way that they feel. Because it occurred to me when I came in the door and I was looking at the tree and the lights and the food, and I'm thinking, what kind of a night is his family having?
Yeah.
Because I knew Carvo had little kids and he had a wife, his second wife, but he had a wife. So he had kids who were probably around our age, but he also had little kids with his new wife. He was somebody's son. He was somebody's brother. He was somebody's dad. He was somebody's something. And I just thought like, and I could not join them in their joy. Like even right now, I still get emotional about it. It's like I could not.
Wasn't this like 5 years? You kind of like only 5 years after her murder.
I was
What?
so I was 18, and it happened when I was 12 and a half. So yeah.
That is a remarkable depth of compassion from you, just that closely removed from that horrible crime committed against your mother and your family. I'm stunned at the degree of compassion that showed in your. Hold on, Mike. I can smell my sauce. I got to.
You want to go? Yeah, go stir your sauce. I'm gonna pause it.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, so I just remember feeling like I just remember thinking about like his little kids, and it just hurt my heart, and I walk around the corner and my Nana sees me, my little Nana with the white hair and the tissue up her sleeve, and she comes up to me and she puts her little hands up on my face and she says, "Now, isn't this the greatest Christmas present you could ever get?" And it's just like hitting me again, like, and the reason why I'm telling this story is it was in that crack. It was in that moment when I stopped seeing him in that one tone of color, that one note, right? It's when I realized like, oh, he's not some monster.
Right.
What he did was monstrous, but he's not a monster. He is a deeply flawed and fucked up human being. And he was also somebody's dad. And so there was room, that crack, it's where the light gets in, that wound, it's where the light gets in. And there was a moment of possibility for me to rewrite the story, the meaning that I had assigned to him and the whole thing. And that was the beginning. Like that was the beginning of the forgiveness process, is when I had a willingness to be curious about him. Like, what would have had to have happened to this person that was a good idea, like that murdering somebody, beating somebody to death was possible. And so that curiosity was the thing. It was my golden ticket, man.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this with your writing and about writing in general. I discovered long ago that I think that not only is curiosity the purest fuel for empathy in the way you just described, but it's also I think our most helpful fuel is writers. Whether you're writing from the point of view of the younger you in your memoir or personal essay, or you're trying to enter into the experience of someone you'll never be in a novel. To me, it's all about that. And so you're talking about Leonard Cohen and his wisdom and his work. One of my favorite lines from Tom Waits that's about the same kind of thing is from his song Heart Attack and Vine, and it's, there is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk. And I love that. I mean, that's blasphemy to some ears. What do you mean God's drunk? Well, no, if you look at the word to pervert from Latin actually means to turn away from. Mm-hmm. So what's a pervert turning away from? The light in him.
Well, so I always say to people, no matter what you're doing, you're either running towards or away from God. And I don't think of God as like a white dude in a robe. It's whatever you want to call it. Perfect love, the light that is, right? Whatever. I don't get hung up on it.
The better angels of your nature, to paraphrase. Just the better you that can be.
100%. And one of the
every day's a battle for us in that way. Am I going towards or away?
And
I heard a wonderful interview with Tobias Wolff, the great short story and memoirist Tobias Wolff, and he talked about being a pathological liar as a boy. And I think it was Terry Gross in NPR said, "Well, what was that like?" He said, "Oh, how did you stop?" He said, "I stopped because I began to feel that every time I lied, it subtracted from me." And I love that. I've never forgotten that word choice, that those parts of us we're proud of add to us. And self-destructive behavior, whatever behavior is that is not going towards light but darkness, subtracts from us in a total sense. And it's really interesting. And as a creative writer all these years, I tend to be drawn towards people who fuck up royally.
Yeah, me too.
So a bookseller in the West Coast said, when he introduced me, I don't know if I liked it. I don't know if I liked the introduction when he gave it, but I've been thinking about it a lot. I think he's right on. He said, yeah, Debuss's characters get dealt bad cards and then play them badly.
It's it's fascinating though. Like one of the things about in curiosity, and I want to touch on this because I started the show talking about how you're one of my favorite people, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, and one of them I think is your curiosity, which I'm gonna come back to in a second. But I feel like, I'm not interested in people who are experts I'm fascinated by people who have mastery of some sort of skills, especially when it's shit that like I can't do, right? Like that's why like one time you said, I thanked you. I'm like, thank you so much for coming to see my sweetie at his Doc Desert Eagles show, right? The music show. And you said, well, my favorite part was watching you watch him.
Mm.
Because I have this look on my face when I watch him.
I
And it's
remember
because
your face. And by the way, kick-ass guitarist, man. I still remember that
yeah, he's
show.
incredible, but that's just it. Like he has a skill set that I'm just like, I don't even know how he can do that. And it could be the littlest thing. I'm not not to say that juggling is a little thing, but if you have mastery of something that I can't do, there's a part of me that's just kind of in wonder. The little kid in me loves that, right? It loves to like kind of bear witness. And so I'm not interested though in the person who's interested in being the smartest one in the room, right? I'm not interested in the one who shows up with their cup already full. Like you can't pour into something. I always say it's really hard to be full of God, but I could even say it's really hard to be full of curiosity when you're already full of shit, when like you already think you know everything. And you kind of show up, I think, again, one of the reasons why I adore you is you show up with either you are a brilliant actor and you've pulled the wool completely over my eyes, which I don't think you have, but you have a genuineness of curiosity about people. And I have met many talented writers in my lifetime who were brilliant on the page, but you could not pay me to hang out with them
Mm.
because I immediately felt their fill in the blank. Let's say I could feel their judgment or their lack of interest, or if they couldn't get something from me, or I was kind of a nobody or whatever. And that's not me taking things personally. I can tell when somebody like gives a shit if I'm standing next to them or whatever.
Right.
I have watched you long enough, and like you have taught me so much about not even like, yes, you've taught me craft things, of course, like, the five senses, concrete specific details of the instruments by which we steer. Like there's all these, just like you, I have like a quote bank in there, a Rolodex, and you've taught me so much about being a writer, but mostly by paying attention to my intuition, being curious, right? Like talking to me about when we write, we're more in the dream state, like those kinds of things. And you've taught me how to be a better human being, just by the way that you meet people and greet people. And when there's a line for book signings, you are so open, and I'm sure you reserve a certain amount of privacy. I'm not saying you're just like, oh, whatever, but you are genuinely curious about people. You ask them questions. One of the first things you almost ask everybody is, so what are you writing? How's your writing? What's going on with you? But it seems like you actually mean it. So can you kind of talk about that? Like, are you as fascinated by people and I don't know who said it. We have to mull and to muse why man does what he does. Is that Faulkner? Who said that?
Faulkner. That's Faulkner, and it has to do with curiosity. He was asked late in his life, "What's the main thing a writer needs?" He said, "I used to think it was talent, but I don't anymore." He said, "I think it's curiosity." And his exact phrase was insight, to wonder, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does. And if you have that, talent makes no difference or not. Hold on. I have to be compassionate to my dog who's whining. He's getting very old.
You know how I feel about him.
Well, I gotta go let my dog out. I'll
Yes, please do.
be right back.
Yep.
Bother you? He's gonna be barking for a while.
No, it doesn't matter. I don't care.
All right.
Real life. This is real life.
This is so real life. So let me get to your look. I don't know. The truth is, my brother Jeb is a genius, like really a genius.
I've met him. He's wicked smart in lots of ways.
Classical guitar when he was 13 by listening to records. I mean, just crazy smart. gifted, and he's one of these rare people who's as interested in science and math as he is in
Mm-hmm.
people and places. And I mean, maybe that's not rare, but it's rare. All I can say is when he goes on about string theory and mathematics, science, my eyes glaze over and I can hardly stay awake until he starts to tell a story with people in it.
Yes.
I just am not interested. And now I love that science exists. I know, if by the way, if we pay attention to it, it might get us out of this pandemic. It will. It actually will get us out of this.
Hashtag truth.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I unless there's a human being in the story, I have no. I just fall asleep. I am deeply interested in human beings.
Me
I have
too.
never stopped being interested in other people's stories and how they live and how they don't live and where they come from and where they're going. I just and one of the things I really really love about humanity is the diversity of culture and ethnic origin and religion or lack thereof. I love how we can all be from such different places but have such common humanity. And so
Which I would say that's the divine, but that's the thing. Like that's the divine spark that lives within all of us. And
I agree.
I think it's fascinating that we love to focus on what makes us different. And if we spent more time like focusing on the thing that golden thread that runs from your heart to my heart to somebody else's heart. And I was thinking about like exactly what you're just saying. I'm the same way. Like I am a very, when I'm watching a show, like or watch because I love as a storyteller, I love movies too. Like a lot of spiritual people are very proud of the fact that they don't own TVs, and stuff. And I'm always like, do you
Hold
need
on, I'm by my way. Love you. See you. I'll see you tonight.
love you, Fontaine. So I'm very character driven too. I want to get into the meat of who is this person, what's their problem, what are they doing, to help me to understand why he's doing that. Like let me, if I don't, here's one of the worst things I always say. Like I'll never forget this. I'll never forget this. I remember listening one time to, I don't know if it was a story, a show. I can't remember if I read it, but I'm a reader who has cinematic vision, right? So I think very kind of cinematically.
Yeah.
So
And,
I was,
and, and by the way, you're right cinematically.
oh, well, I've had good teachers. Huh? Huh? So one of the things that I remember this guy, so it was like this story and there were these two characters and it was like these two guys who were each other's nemesis, right? They couldn't stand each other. And so they were all like so this one guy is getting interviewed and they ask him, so let's just call them like Joe and Bob, right? Or whatever. And they ask Joe, so what do you think about Bob? And Joe says, I don't.
Hmm.
I don't think about Bob. And I just thought, oh, like that is one of the, here's what I always say to people. If I love you or I hate you, I'm still engaged. You know you're in trouble when I go numb about, like when I just don't have a feeling one way or the other, when I'm like,
Well, which is the opposite of love, right? It's actually
exactly.
difference. It's apathy, right? We don't hate people we don't still love or have some pain with. And so, I read introduction to a book of personal essays a few years ago. I'm pretty sure it was the master essayist Philip Lopate. He said by all means, whatever you do, and he's talking about writing about your life.
Yeah.
Said you and your experience directly with prose. He said you must avoid the stench of the ego. And I love that phrase, but I think it's the way to live your life. We must avoid the stench of the ego. And there's a great line from Flannery O'Connor, which I will butcher if I even try to quote her, but it has to do with something like no art is sunk in the self. Um, she goes on to say, basically, to paraphrase, she said, in order to see clearly, you must let go of the self. But she says it much more poetically than that.
Well,
My,
I think, sorry, go ahead.
but my point is, the irony is, though, but what if you're writing deeply about yourself? What if you're writing deeply, as you are in your memoir, as I tried to do in my memoir, Townie? What happens then? Well, here's to what you're saying earlier. I think the deeper you go, there is no other. There is no other. I'm a white middle-aged man, but I have felt more like myself reading from the point of view of a black girl bo- living her life before I was born. I felt parts of my humanity come to life reading from the point of view of an old Jewish rabbi 1,000 years before my birth. I think about Tolstoy's definition of art. Art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. Well,
You know,
what's going to transfer feeling? Truth, 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 and nothing but truth.
well, because especially massholes too. I think we have a particular not, and I don't think it's just like East Coast kids, but I think we have a very powerful a super sniffer to bullshit. So we can feel it. Like it's almost like I can feel it in my body, like the alarms are going off. And I, sometimes my sweetie and I are watching a show, and as a musician, he finds it repulsive. Like he gets mad when we're watching something and he said they're being lazy and they're using the music, the sweeping music, to try to manipulate me into feeling something. And he's like, if they did their job, we would feel. I'm like, yeah, we'd feel it from the writing and the acting or whatever, right? And so it's
Your
really
work
fast.
speaks for itself. Don't interrupt. Remember
Sorry.
that? If your work speaks for itself, don't interrupt.
Yeah. Well, so this dude, whenever I talk to you, I literally wish I'm like, I need a whiteboard so I can like write my thoughts down, because there's
Oh,
like
shucks.
the seven places, Dubus, that I want to
I'll cut
seven.
you off. You're saying
What?
about.
Oh,
I,
no. Just that I think authenticity, right? Like that thing about truthiness. And I'm like, we want the truth. And I think it might have been you that told me that even we want to write, even when we're writing personal story, there's a universality to it, which is like that what the reader is really saying. I think this was you that told me this. Show me.
yeah.
Like we want to recognize and identify ourselves. And it's what's so funny, because I really want to dive into this because I'm fascinated. And it's a little like, I'm just like, I'm pivoting really quickly. But so I feel like I have like you have a Rolodex of all these other people's quotes. Like I have a Rolodex of your quotes. And I want to talk about this for a second, but I want to start by saying something. So the work that I do as a spiritual mentor, the overarching name of it is called Fearless Flow. And I think being in the flow state as a writer in the creative, like when you're in creativity, that to me is divine flow. It's also a way to move through the world, right? To be in the fearless flow. And the process that I use is called Your Story to Your Glory. But when people say to me, like, what's fearless flow? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to break it down to you with these 5 different quotes. And I've never told you this, but one of your quotes is one of the things that I always share with my clients.
Hmm.
Let me preface it by saying this. You're going to claim it's not your quote. And then I'm going to challenge you to go on the internet and find where it says anybody else has ever said it except for you. Because you once said to me, it's like I don't know, Chinese proverb, it's something. And I'm like, I have never been, I have looked, I have actually spent a couple of hours going, I'm going to find the origin of this. But every Google search ever is quoted as coming from you. And I'm going to show the people at home. Right? I made a graphic. I even made a whole meme about it, right? So here it is. If the mad dog comes at you, whistle for him.
Oh, wow. I love the image you came up with. Oh, it's scary.
Well,
Ooh.
it's not, but look at,
Well, let
but
me talk about it, though. So you talk about fearless flow.
yeah, but I'm talking, I think part of the fearlessness is a willingness to be vulnerable, to be honest, to feel deeply, to fuck up, to say I'm sorry, to say I love you, to forgive. It's like part of the whole thing. It's not just like, I love this because it's this thing of like, and why I use it is this whole concept of knowing who walks beside you, knowing that there is something greater than you within you and beside you that walks with you, so you can move. Like, so I always have this image, right? Like I see that dog coming across that bridge. There's nowhere to go. I'm on the bridge. And I'm like, I always think of it like this, like such a masshole kid, like, fuck it, I'm here, let's go, right? And I'm like, let's
Let's
go.
go, motherfucker.
Go, right? So, but I want to talk, you can talk about that quote, but then I want to talk about quotes in general and how you've amassed.
It just brought back such memories of where we grew up.
Yeah,
Fuck
go ahead.
it, let's go. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is, right? But it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to turn away. And it's fascinating. Have you watched the show Kingdom? Have you seen the show Kingdom yet?
I don't think so. Have I? Remind me.
All right. It came out in 2013. and ended in 2017. It was on some obscure channel, but it just became available on Netflix.
Okay.
And it is all about an MMA gym. It's all about these fighters. And one of the head actors is a guy named Jonathan Tucker. He's one of my favorite actors. He's from Boston, even though in this film, they're all from Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
But it is fascinating. And I think of you so often. And the acting is so, but it's dark. Like, it's hardcore. It's about fucked up fighters. And I'm like, oh, I think 83 will dig this. But I'm just giving you that. But my point being is that if you want to talk about this in particular, is that what you wanted to talk about? This quote?
Well, I want to talk about the notion of fearless flow because I think that we can get there, but for me, like I was just thinking about my writing session today, I have this whole ritual. I'm sure most writers do of what I need to do to get where I need to get to dream, and I always try to get to an egoless place. I try to get to a place with no agenda, and I try to get to a place where I'm just receiving it, which
That's
can make
exactly it.
to be very naked. I mean, it's a very emotionally naked place to be, as you know. And but I gotta step through a bunch of fears to get there. I think about our friend Dennis Lehane. He said once in a talk, he said, people ask me, well, how come you've gone on to write books when your buddies you were writing with when you were young stopped? He said, I don't know. I think it's fear management. I learned every morning to manage my fear. I think every writer to some extent does manage the fear, but then you got to step into it. And then when you do step into it, when you whistle for the mad dog, it actually disappears. It actually becomes something else. And maybe it is a fearless flow. All right, so I'm contradicting myself. I was about to say, I don't know, it feels like a fearful flow for me, but you step into it anyway. But no, I'm gonna take it back. And I hate to bring in this metaphor, but in the same, like, I talked about, right, we're talking about Townie. So that membrane around everybody, that this should be sacrosanct, right? Every human being has this invisible, and actually, since I wrote about this, a psychologist has told me it's actually called a kinesphere.
Yeah.
That,
A kinetic spheric energy, like,
yeah,
around you.
where I have no right to reach over and touch someone I don't know. It's a violation of their privacy unless they give me permission. When two adults are consenting to make love, they're both dropping their membranes to merge. But when you punch someone as hard as you can in the face, what a violation of that membrane, that's part of the space around someone that's invisible, but you can sense, right? We all know when we're staying too close to someone we don't know well. If you're healthy and you've got a right fucking
Yes.
vibe, and we all know when someone's standing too close to us.
Yes.
What's my point? My point is that writing with fear, and then it felt a lot like stepping into a fight is terrifying, and then when you're fighting, it's not terrifying, unless you're about to get beaten to death, and then it does feel that way.
Avi, who's Alvi, who is like the owner of the gym. He's like the dad, and his son's fighting like this whole thing.
In the show.
Yep. They say, what's the most terrifying thing? And he said, right before you go in the cage.
Right before.
And he goes, once you're in the cage, you're in the cage. Like, it all, like, and I that's what I think about. Now, when I talk about fearless flow, what I say to people is, they'll say, so you teach me how to never have fear again? And I said, no. A certain amount of fear is healthy because it keeps you from doing stupid shit. I said, but I'm talking about when we, the way I use it in spiritual mentoring, I think I always say samesies different, like samesies different, but it's kind of like you, it's not that we never have fear again. It's how quickly we recognize we've taken a detour into fear and we're back and we come back. It's like returning to our right mind again and again and again.
Okay. And I think too, a lot about the two word, the reaction versus responding.
100%. I just did my episode, my podcast episode was about that, was last week.
Wow. I'm going to go watch it. So, I mean, when I look back, which I don't do very often, but when I look back at what I've written over the years, I see that there's so many themes of reacting versus responding, especially with male characters, where they get a bad feeling and then they react either with violence or drinking too much or loveless sex with a fucking stranger, or typical self-destructive behaviors. And one of the things that I've tried to teach myself over the years, or maybe I'm not teaching myself at all, maybe the world's teaching me is, but I have learned a profound difference. There's a profound difference between stepping into fear, feeling it, and then freaking out and reacting, or stepping into it and sitting with it and then responding. And every day writing asks me to do B. Every day I step, could be, and the fears are myriad. One is, holy shit, will I be able to pull this off? And you're building a novel. I mean, writing a 400, 500, 600 page or longer novel feels like building a house of cards over many years. And the windows open a little bit and a breeze could come in. And every day you don't know if you're going to actually get another floor out. Will you actually be able to, is another card going to come? And another and another. And it takes a great leap of faith into the unknown. One of my favorite lines from some ancient Chinese poet: we poets knock upon the silence for an answering music. But when you step into that kind of fear every morning, the way I try to in my writing cave, and I know you do too, Karen, there's you're totally right. It does become a fearless flow, just like a fight. I mean, I hate to bring in the violent metaphor because I don't fight anymore, and I hope to never be in a fight again. But even though I still know how, and even though that ability's never left my body, there is something that, and again, back to this notion of divinity and something larger inside of us. There's a great line from D.H. Lawrence. It is not I who writes, but the wind that
It
blows
blows
through
through
me.
me. Oh,
Right?
I know. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites.
Yes, and I, you've heard me teach writing ad nauseum, but it took me years before I began to say in front of a group of creative writers, I think there's a difference between making it up on the one hand and imagining it on the other. Anybody can throw together a story, but are you allowing this story that's knocking on your brain pan and no one else's to come? And I do believe that these characters are sacred beings from the cosmos who choose us the way we choose our own parents. And this sounds a little new agey and out there, but I do believe we have a sacred obligation to bring these stories to light once they've got inside of us.
Dude, we call it, so in A Course in Miracles, we call it, there's an individual curriculum. There's a divine assignment that is only yours. And I
Hmm.
said, I like, when I think back to, oh, the Golden Gloves, and, you get the whisper or the thing or the intuition or the instinct, I got to, even if it's conscious or not conscious, it's subconscious or unconscious, where you decide to sit down and write at that little table next to the radiator, the tea, the whole thing. But you started to write about a girl in Maine on the hood of a car losing the virginity. It has never occurred to me, right? Like, meaning, if I go to write, it's always personal essay, memoir-ish, from what I know, from what I've seen, from what I've felt. Like, I did not get the assignment novelist, like fiction writer. Like, that's like, I would laugh when I go to when I was learning to become a gateless writing facilitator, instructor, teacher, whatever you want to call it. There was always this point where somebody would lead the salon that night. And whenever the like fiction person would lead the salon, all the memoirists would be like, "Oh God, you're gonna ask us to like create a story, a fiction story." And then when the memoirist would say to them, like, "All right, we got to write from real life," they're like, "Oh God, don't make me do that. I don't know how you guys do that. It freaks me out." And then all the memoirists want to do is they want to talk about what's happened. And of course, we could talk about how fiction is. So even when I write fiction, right, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day I can write a short story. But even the quote unquote characters I try to write as a fiction story, like I've attempted this a couple of times now, they still sound like the people we grew up with. Like, remember when I played you that tape down in Florida at the Eckerd
Yeah.
conference, and you listened to my stepfather talking, and you said, "Oh, I know that guy."
Oh yeah.
All my characters, like, I have no idea how you write as a dude, right? I shouldn't say I have no idea. I do have the gift of being able in my day-to-day life to put myself in other people's shoes. I think that's why I can be compassionate, right? Why I can show up without judgment. I can be
Deeply,
curious.
deeply compassionate. Speaking of compassionate, I gotta let my whining dog out
Yeah,
again.
yeah, please.
I think he's in pain these days. He's very old. I'll
Well,
be.
why Well, I mean,
I'm
he's
just gonna let him out.
all right.
Let him back in. I'll be right back.
All right. And we're back.
Sorry, KK. I'm
It's
back.
okay. Don't be sorry. You know me. I'm all for the animals. I'm like, take care of your pup.
All for the animal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just find it fascinating how your first instinct was to write from somebody else's point of view, where I sometimes feel like um my like even when I'm teaching, like I'll start to say something, then I correct myself and I'll say, I can only teach from my own experience. I can only really truly speak from my own experience. And I can relay, sure, what somebody else who told me who had a fill in the blank, had a miscarriage, an abortion, whatever. I can only speak of experiences that I've had with any kind of authority and agency.
Right.
But I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing how fiction writers can really embody these other beings. And here's what I will say though. I think it's possible because something divine, something spiritual, is moving through you to assist. Because I believe, how so Tim O'Brien has that quote where he says writers tend to be the kind of people that like to enter into the mystery of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're doing when we sit down to write. We're making a pact, right? We're like kind of like, pinky swearing and like cutting the thing in the blood pact and saying, okay, I'm here to receive. And Rabindranath Tagore has this beautiful quote that he says, everything that belongs to you will come to you if you create the capacity to receive it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're doing when we're sitting down. We're saying, okay, this story that's knocking, because your stories came for you. I'm the steward of the stories that have, I guess, happened to me or came to me.
I love the word choice you just used a few minutes ago. You said the assignment I got, meaning you, Karen, the assignment you got was to write more derivatively from your life experience. And I think you're nailing something. First, I think every writer should try every kind of form. I mean, you don't know what might be your truest form. And there are a lot of writers who can do two or three very well.
You're one of them.
Well,
I've received the compliment. It's true.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I do deflect those things.
I know you do.
But thank you. I think about Robert Penn Warren, poetry and fiction. I think about a lot of poets. Dennis Johnson was a beautiful poet and a prose writer, on and on. There's so many examples. But I do think that we should all try various forms. I mean, I never ever thought a memoir would come out of me, but I'm glad I wrote it. And I've written a bunch of essays. My point, though, is there's a wonderful line from a friend of mine I've probably told you about. He got into Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. He was like one of three of 1,500 American applicants to get in that year. And, he does the whole master's program and he does his thesis performance, like a Shakespeare play. And his teacher's like some really big, famous Shakespearean actor. And he goes to my buddy's dressing room and says, Paul, I won't do the accent because, Paul, that was good, but it wasn't great. And Paul said, what do you mean? I worked my ass off. I did everything you've been teaching me. I won't do the accent, but he said to Paul, I don't know what to tell you. It's just none of us are one note. We are all a symphony. And amen, amen, and amen to that. I think about, both as human beings, but also as writers. Who knows what our form is? But also some of us know pretty quickly what it is. And I think about William Stafford, the poet. He said, the poet before writing must put himself or herself into a state of openness or receptivity. Receptivity, which you've been talking about. But he has a wonderful litmus test in this essay that he wrote about what it is. He says it's one, you're being receptive when you're willing to accept anything that comes, no matter what it is.
Yes.
Easier said than done. Easier said than done.
Well, because sometimes we don't want to write about like that. We don't want to write about the thing that we've been trying to hide from, duck, drop and roll, whatever. Like, sometimes you're like, oh, that fucking thing, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to write about that.
So it's all about control and letting go of control. And the truth is, look, I'm sitting in this house that I built with my bare hands, but I still have a mortgage, and I better control my day to make the daily bread, to pay my monthlies. We all have these responsibilities and duties hanging over our heads, and we all have to control our day to get our responsibilities met. And yet the writing then asks, when, all those qualities that make you a good, responsible citizen, to let go of them completely when you sit down at the desk and let go of control. Easier said than done. But I love this next part from Stafford about receptivity. He said, you also know you're being receptive when you are willing to accept anything that comes, one, and two, and this is downright un-American because we're not trying to be this way, you are willing to fail. Like you're truly willing to fail at this. Oh man, we're not taught that. We don't get out of bed to be a loser all day. We get out to be winners.
Well,
And
but didn't you, when you wrote, I think it was Gone So Long. I love doing these little plugs for your books. I feel like Vanna White right now. When you wrote this, didn't you hit a point, I remember, when you said, I had to throw like 400, 300, 500, I don't know how many pages. It was painful. 200 pages out. Was it that book?
about 190 pages, about 14 months of work. Oh, but I've done that for probably 3 or 4 other books over these 30-something years. Yeah, man. I mean, that's what Faulkner meant when he said you have to murder your darlings. But again, it comes back to truth, because so in the case of that book, as you know, and the irony is I started writing that novel before we met, but that woman in that story has a similar scenario to yours, which is that her father, well, and your father didn't kill your mother, but in this case, in the novel,
Yes.
father kills the mother of one of my characters in that novel, Gone So Long, when she was 3. And so now she's in her 40s and she's an aspiring writer. She hasn't quite found her voice, found her way. But for almost a year and a half of writing, Karen, she wasn't a writer, she was an actor. I had whole fucking scenes in LA and Hollywood. I've had some run-ins with these Hollywood criminals. I've not criminal, some of them are for sure. I was dying to write a Hollywood novel, and there's all this stuff about acting. I used to act, so I was, oh my God, I get to write about acting. But that built-in shockproof shit detector that Hemingway writes about went off all the time, and I finally accepted it that, oh, this is such bullshit. She told you on page 9 that she was an aspiring writer, and you just don't want to write about writing. So you wrote what you wanted to for a year, and guess what? It's all bullshit. You got to cut every bit of it.
Yeah, you were manhandling it, right? Like it was like, I'm going to write, I want it to be what it is. And the story, like, so we say in trauma, right? We say in trauma work, like, I say in trauma work, like the body has its own memory to tell, right? It's just like how, like, it's like who said, story has its own memory to tell?
Tobias Wolff in This Boy's Life, his memoir, he said memory has its own story to tell. Like you and I can be brother and sister, right? We have different parents. Just because you're a female, I'm a male. Just because we're 10 years between us, I'm 10 years older, clearly. And we have different, your bedroom's across the hall, mine's on the other side. Totally different.
Yeah, can we dive into that a little bit? Because I know for sure that this is something that a lot of writers struggle with. And I know that I find it fascinating. My sister got mad at me one time. She read something that I wrote. I can't remember for the life of me what it was. This isn't me bagging on my sister. It's just to make this point. And I remember she put the paper down, and I could tell she was pissed. And I was like, what? And she's like, it's not fair. And she says, it's not just your story. It's also my story and my story. And I said, well, then you can write your own version of the events. I wasn't trying to be a dick, but I was like, if I sit here and worry about, and we can kind of maybe tap into the difference between emotional truth and factual, like, we don't want to make shit up as memoirists or whatever, but it's like, because of that slight age difference, because of where we were as a naive 12-year-old and her as a little bit smarter 13 going on 14-year-olds, those 18 months made a difference. And the way that she related with my mother and my stepfather, the way that I related to the world was different. And I think so many people are afraid. I think you and Melanie talked about this in Writing Hard Stories, because you were asking her about her own writing, and you asked her, do you have any siblings? And she said, yeah, I have 3 brothers. And then you started to go, yeah, Melanie, but that's not how, right? And she's like, I know, that's it. Like, I get paralyzed that somebody else is going to say that's not how it really happened.
Let me speak to that. Yeah, and how it really happened. Well, what the hell's really? Everyone's got their own. I want to talk about truth and facts, but I also want to make this very clear, hopefully clear point. whenever anybody sets out to write a personal essay or a memoir from their perspective, from their deeply subjective emotional memory of what they remember happened,
Mm-hmm.
which may not be what exactly happened, but that's their memory of it, which by the way, Freud, let's go back to Freud for a second. Freud was a pioneer not so much because he was strangely enough, one of the very first to think that an adult's childhood was significant in how the adult turned out. He was less interested in what happened to the child and more interested in what the adult remembered happened to him or her. He thought that was much more revealing than what actually happened. I want to get to facts versus truth. Here's the point I want to make. Please, anyone out there writing a memoir, it is not your job to be the family's biographer.
Mm.
That's not what a memoirist is. You are
Amen.
the family's biographer. You are trying to sing your quiet little song from your part of the string section. You are not the conductor. You're not the biographer. You're not the autobiographer. You are just saying, this is how I remember it was for me. Facts versus truth. Two friends of mine, well, they're relatives, but
I know this story. I love this story. Tell it.
so these two sisters, they're from a family of, they're close to me, larger family. Two sisters from a family of five daughters, they lose their dad. Their dad, I'll just say he was one of my uncles. These are some cousins. And one of the sisters says to the other one, "Well, I just don't think Dad loved us at all." And I'm in the room and I'm listening, and I'm actually doing dishes. I just cooked him dinner, and I began to think about my uncle. And I know he was famous for working 80 to 100 hours a week in his own little business. That he put all five daughters through expensive schools, was putting the older two through grad school. He drops dead of a heart attack at age 53. I'd be willing to bet one of my limbs that if my uncle heard that, he'd sit up and say, "How can you say that? How can you say that I didn't love you? Of course I loved you girls." Except the woman who said that never saw Dad at breakfast, never saw him at lunch, never saw him at dinner, never saw him at bedtime, never saw him at a game or at a a
Recital or anything.
idol. Never had pancakes with him on Saturday morning, and on Sunday, instead of going to church with his family, he'd take a little time in golf. My friend was actually 180 degrees wrong. Of course, Dad loved her, but the truth is, she felt unloved. The facts are, of course, he loved her. The truth is, she did not feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
Just some shadow figure who wrote checks. And that is the province of the memoir. That is the province of art. Don't forget, journalism is about information. What we do is about experience. Journalism is about recording. What we do is capturing. Journalism, especially now, damn it, should be about the facts. But what we do is about the truth, right? I know that my father loved me. On one level, I know that he loved me, but I didn't feel loved by him as a kid. He wasn't around. I hate to say it out loud, but that's all through my accidental memoir, Townie, too. So,
I have so many directions I could go in with this. One thing I want to say to people who are listening is that if you are loving what Andre is saying right now, he's teaching an online workshop in October at Main Media Workshop online, which PS surprise I signed up for, so I'm wicked
oh,
excited.
good.
It's my
Excellent.
birthday present to myself, by the way. So
Well,
so those of you who are listening, if you can, I always say, if you can hear the sound of my voice, Google that shit. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is this thing because I've been present when you've been being interviewed. I've read a lot of your interviews, and there's certain places where I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard you be asked this question, so I'm going to ask it. Or I just want to preface it and say that, like, you were just talking about that, about like your dad, right? And I remember being at the Newburyport Literary Festival, being in I think it's the South Congregational Church. I'm not sure which one it is. It's the big white one. There's the pulpit and you're up there. And I remember you got up one year. It was one year, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were reading an essay or something about or to your daughter.
hmm
And I remember sitting in the pews with Kath and watching you read this story, and like, you're crying, I'm crying, Kat's crying, like everybody's crying because the feeling and the depth of feeling that you spoke, like your love, like I'm getting emotional right now remembering it. Your love for your daughter is palpable. Like I could feel it.
Mhm.
And I remember in that moment thinking to myself, there's a reason I'm going to bring it back to your dad, but I thought I was thinking to myself, holy shit, like what would, how might it have been and who might I be if I had had a dad who loved me like that? And I
Mhm.
just remember it like hitting my body, like even now, like the emotions coming back up, like, oh my God. And then in the next thought, I thought, but I wouldn't be who I am right now if I had.
Yeah.
And so we love to blame or whatever our parents for what they didn't give us, but somewhere in that lack of whatever, another part of me grew and rose up and I became this version of myself. And I think about this with your dad too. And you know, in Townie, when you talk about, and that's how Townie came about, right? Like you're writing this, this essay or something on coaching your kids, your sons in baseball, and realizing, why was baseball absent from my own childhood? And you realize, because my dad was missing. And then holy shit, now you're writing this memoir, right? This memoir, I think you call them memoirs.
I was
But
on
my,
a call and some woman says she hates memoirs. She calls them memoirs.
yeah, memoirs. But so, but I don't think you would have been the beautiful being you are right now too, perhaps, if your dad, like, when we can't know, right? We can't know, but can we talk about that a little
Yeah, I want to talk about suffering. I want to talk about the value of suffering,
bit?
not to be masochistic or
No, no,
sadistic.
no. I agree. I agree. Go ahead.
I do think that one of the I, Americans. I don't know about other cultures. I grew up in this one. I think that we are understandably averse to suffering.
Mm.
But we also look at it. The reason I say Americans, I think we've
You can
gotten
speak. You can speak very. You
well,
don't have to. You
there's
don't
so
have to.
here. I think that the American dream has done such a disservice to us ultimately. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that our job, and there's nothing wrong with parts of the American dream. You work hard, you achieve a little piece of dirty ground, to paraphrase a Springsteen song. You got your little house and your picket fence, and nothing wrong. I'm very grateful to be living in a house that's mine, that I built, where I raised my kids. I mean, there's a lot of beauty to climbing that ladder of success. And but what I find so unfortunate about the American dream is that the shadow message is that unhappiness is you're a failure.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not happy, then you failed. If you're not successful, then you're a loser. If you're not, there's so much shadow to it. It's such a narrow way of looking at the world. And one thing that it blocks out is death and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just look at how we treat death. It's almost treated as if we talk quietly about it, and it's as if you lost the race if all of a sudden you drop dead. And we sub out these very important rituals to strangers. Funeral homes, to wrap our loved one's body, to dress it, to put it in a box, to dig the hole. So that my brother and I built my father's coffin
Mm-hmm.
and dug his grave. And doing those two things brought me so deeply into this incredible ritual. And the word ritual comes from the Latin ritus, and it means river. To step into rituals, to step into an ancient river. And frankly, I think it's where we are truly cleansed. So after being up all night building that coffin with my brother, which is at once one of the most darkest moments of my life, because my father dropped dead suddenly when he was about my age now, but also one of the most beautiful moments, doing that with my brother for our father.
Mm-hmm.
I come home, my wife and kids are still asleep, the kids are little, and I grab a novel off the shelf, and it's a Graham Greene novel. And the epigraph to the novel is from the French writer Leon Bloy. And the quote is, "Man has places in his heart which do not yet exist, and into them enters suffering in order that they may have existence."
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll say it again. Man has places in his heart which do not yet exist, and into them enters suffering in order that they may have existence. from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Grief
Mm-hmm.
carves a crucible, right? This container for hot steel. Grief carves a crucible in which joy is held.
100%.
So the truth is, there is no one reason that you talk about my love of people. The truth is, I do have a genuine interest in human beings, but I also have a genuine daily joy in life, and I do think it's because it was a rough start. It was a scrappy start to this.
Exactly.
And I think I'm very comfortable with shadow. In fact, it's taken me years, and you and I have talked about this. It's taken me years to adjust to things not going horribly awry every day. It's taken me years to adjust to the abundance of turning the ignition, the car starts right up, to open the fridge and having food in it, to being able to write a check for my monthly bills and having enough in there. Some
Mm-hmm.
I've got to scramble, but it's not how we grew up. And
I
so
know.
I'm still hardwired for scarcity and bad news. And I have to really work, right, to fucking let go of that.
Dude, I hear you like on so many levels. My sweetie, he hasn't been playing out. Like 2020 has just been fucking extra weird. It's a wicked, weird world right now, right? But at one of his gigs recently, somebody came up to him, and it's somebody who has either seen me online or listens to the podcast or whatever it is. And they asked him, is she always like that? And he's like, what? And they're like happy. Is she like always like that? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, it's not that she doesn't like ever, it's not that like stuff doesn't come up,
Yeah.
but like it's that she doesn't have like bad days. I might have bad hours or bad moments where I've stepped out of the fearless flow. And I often tell my clients, right? And I work with people who, it's not people who are just like, oh, what's my purpose? Not that that's not a big question to ask, right? We all have like, what's my identity? Who am I and why am I here? That's a big thing. But like, one of my clients has, her 13-year-old daughter died, unexpectedly. It's tragic. And I told her, I literally, Andre, last week on a call, I told her that exact thing about you and your brother building your father's coffin. And there was a reason why I told her that, which I'll circle back to in a second. But one of the things that I often tell my clients is suffering is a wicked good teacher until you get a better teacher. So for many, many, many years, suffering taught me a lot, like valuable stuff to like hit my knees, to like hit that place of, to be comfortable in the discomfort, to be able to recognize and feel for other people's suffering. Like I wouldn't trade it for the world. I often say like losing my mother, how I did and when I did, was one of the greatest gifts that she gave me. In this grand theater, this great big classroom that we're having the experience in, it was a very powerful thing for me to have that experience when I did and how I did and all of that stuff, because it's made me, and I don't know, it's just, I was already a sensitive kid, but it also, it just like fine-tuned me like an instrument. I don't know, it did something where I'm very sensitive to the world around me. And I think as writers, we have to be, right? Henry James, this is, I don't know if you were the first person to ever say it to me, but that great quote where he says, try to be the kind of person upon whom nothing is lost.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I really try to do. I think one of the greatest ways that we show love is to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think that when you were like sanding and cutting and hammering and paying attention to this coffin where your father's body was going to be laid to rest was an incredibly powerful thing. But, this whole thing about just grief and death and how we as Americans deal with it, what happened is before, like, when I look at cultures where there's really like the wailing, right? Like where the women are like wailing, or in the tradition where they sit what is it when they sit around in the Jewish tradition for like 3 or 4 days in black? Do you know? It's
No, in my Jewish.
they sit Shiva. I think it's sitting Shiva, right? And so for me, I think those big demonstrations of somebody we love has left their body. They haven't left us. They're always with us, but they've left this physical form, which is how we tend to connect with them. But back in American culture, we did used to have these rituals where the body would be in the living room and people would come and they would pray and they would do all the stuff. But then when the wars started happening, so many young men in like then the women. So you got all these soldiers who are dying in mass. You have the women working in the factories, and there was literally no time to do that. So that's why the shift happened in our culture, why we no longer grieve that way. And there wasn't time to wipe noses and snivel and feel sorry for ourselves because there was a fucking war and we had stuff to do. So people, that's why we have this mentality now, like this kind of been like passed down through the DNA now of grief culture, which is, you know, that's why people are trying to hurry you up. Like, are you over it yet? Like, get over it. Like, why are you still crying about this? Like, this happened 2 years ago.
You know, there was a study done by psychiatric entity of leading psychiatrists around the country, and it's in a medical book now. And a friend of mine who lost her son when he was 17, 15 years ago, and of course will never be over it, was outraged because the psychiatric statement was, if your grief lasts more than 2 years after losing a loved one, it's pathological. And I say, fuck them. That's absolute bullshit. You know, look, pain lasts. Why? Because the love lasts. And no, I think you're onto something. A fun fact about the word living room. So back in the 1980s, Spanish flu, 100 years ago, we would have the wake in the front parlor. But after hundreds and thousands had died, a young architect was designing a house, and he said, well, enough of associating the parlor with death. That's all we associate it with. Now I'm going to call for the living room.
Yeah.
Since our last pandemic, we've been calling living rooms, instead of parlors, living rooms. So it'd be more about life. But keep talking, we keep circling back, I think, to the thing, which is the glorious mystical symphony of it all, the dark and the light. And one cannot exist without the other. That's and right. If fiction has taught me nothing over the last few decades I've been doing it, I mean, all my adult life, it's that there is no other. There is no other. The deeper you go, we are one. And it is a gray mess down there. But it is full of love if you allow it. And, you know, I know that I tend to write dark stories and stories that go into dark places, but, you know, I don't feel darkness when I'm writing them. I feel that I'm in the presence of some truth that could only get to something lighter.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, just by going there.
I agree. And, you know, it's so interesting. This is totally random because there are a couple of things I wanted to write down and ask you about, because I haven't had a chance to ask you a couple of these questions. So this might be a little rapid fire because at some point I got to let you go and stir the sauce and feed your family. So remember that time when I got to meet Oprah because you hooked me up? Remember that time? Remember that time when you, through a series of beautiful, well, first of all, your book, House of Sand and Fog, became an Oprah Book Club. That beautiful house that you live in that you built with your own hands with your brother is because you got the call like, hey, Oprah picked your thing, and it made beautiful things possible. But do you remember when, first of all, like, that was like a bucket list moment for me, and it never would have happened. My picture is like right back there. So it's basically like my mom, me and Marianne Williamson, and then me and Oprah. But Oprah happened because of you. You were the conduit for Oprah to happen, which I will eternally be grateful. But I remember just being amazed. First of all, I thought it was beautiful. I want to give a nod to you you were supposed to interview her in front of that crowd of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And you had your moment in the small private thing that I got to participate in, which was powerful and amazing. But you handed it over to the female. Is she the chancellor or the president of the school?
So she's our first female leader of University of Massachusetts in 130 years. And she's a huge fan of Oprah's, and I thought, no, man, we are in the Me Too movement. It's a very important time for women and women's voices, about time. We don't need a man up there. We need two strong women up there, and I'm so glad. Look.
Wait, that wasn't even my question. I was just giving you a nod, but if you want to talk about that.
Before you get to your question, so, you know, we had Stephen King and Meryl Streep in that series, and I remember, but I remember, especially after Streep came, I could feel like a palpable lift in the self-esteem of these kids on campus. You know, many of whom, I think the majority of whom are first in their family go to college, right? Many of them who come from families where English isn't the first language, many of whom are taking 5, 6 classes a semester and working 34, 40 hours a week at a job.
Mm-hmm.
I love these kids. I grew up with kids like this. I will do anything for these kids. My point is, I especially saw the leap in self-esteem of my female students.
Yeah.
We must be somebody if Meryl Streep comes here. So anyway, that's why I wanted Jackie to be up there with Oprah, and she did a great job, and it was wonderful. So what's your question?
So my question is, so we're there, and so we're sitting in a row, right? And it's like you down there. I think it might have been Mary or your mom, and then it was like Fontaine next to me, and then like her brother, and like all these people in this row. So like I'm just like you, right? Like, yeah, I'm amazed that Oprah's up on stage, but everything that's happening when like you get mentioned, like I'm looking over at you, right? Like I'm fascinated, like what's happening. So there's this moment when Oprah is talking about how she ended up there. And she basically says something, I'm paraphrasing, but it's on point, where she says, Andre Dubus writes good letter. And she's talking about how you wrote to her and you asked her to come, and that you were persistent, and she's like, I need a reason to go there. And the way you wrote about the students, the whole thing, you inspire Oprah to finally come. Okay. Which is amazing in and of itself. But then she says, which you didn't know, and again, I'm going to finally make my point in a second, but she says, and the letter was so good that it is now like in the Smithsonian, along with like a childhood journal and some things. And I'm like looking over at you.
No, it wasn't that letter, and I did not know this.
It was the thank you letter for the, but this is, yeah, this is, okay. So, but this is my point, right? This is my point. So you had written her this letter after she picked your book as an Oprah Book Club pick, and you wrote a thank you note to her. And she's saying that it ended up in the Smithsonian because it was beautiful and amazing. But then she drops this little nugget on us, which is, and my mouth, I remember my mouth like hanging open. It takes a lot to surprise me nowadays. And she says, out of over all the years, out of all the book club picks, Andre was like, if not the only, one of the only people to write to me to say thank you.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Now, this goes back to the kid who puts on the suit jacket, like in the room, right? Those of us, I think, who grew up having to earn it, having to work hard, having to fucking whatever, like we have a level of gratitude sometimes, like we're able to recognize like, hey, this deserves a little recognition or whatever. So I want to ask you the question, first of all. I think the heartbeat of what I'm trying to get at is, how is it possible that supposedly all of these deep thinking, feeling fucking writers with a pen in their hand, it doesn't occur to them to say thank you? Like, what do you think? Like, how is that possible that you were like one of the only people to even think to do that?
Yeah, I'm flummoxed. I don't know, Karen. I love what you just said though about those of us, which is a massive amount of human beings across the world, especially outside of our country, our rich country, which we know is full of poverty. But those of us who grew up with very little, and whatever we got, we just had to scrape for. I hadn't thought about the connection between that and gratitude till just now. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I taught at Harvard for a semester as a visiting professor, and nothing against Harvard or Harvard kids, but my students there were in the top 1% of their high schools. Some of them were scholarship kids from inner city neighborhoods, but for the most part, they were affluent kids from affluent families.
Yes.
High achieving families, high achieving, hardworking kids.
Yes.
Why am I bringing them up? I felt that they were, and this is a generalization. It
Sure,
doesn't
of course.
that I worked with, but the vibe in the room was, I'm used to luminaries coming into my life, and I'm used to doors opening for me. And I'll tell you, that's the primary reason I teach it at UMass Lowell, because these kids are not used to luminaries coming into their lives, and they're not used to doors opening for them. In fact, they're used to doors slamming on them,
Amen.
and they're used to parents having addiction problems, and some are in prison, and a lot of them have died, and you know about that, and they died young, and so to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
And
I
it's
don't.
not about like making the other recipients bad or wrong. I think it's like an attitude though. Like it to this day, I still write handwritten thank you notes,
Yeah.
and I love getting snail mail. Like I love getting a note in the mail, and it could also be that as a kid who like lost her quote unquote parents in a way, like being in a way kind of like orphaned in a way. And those things that like I remember my auntie Jan found a handwritten letter that my mother had written to her like when my mother was like 22 or 23, and she found it in this pocketbook that she had. And as an adult, like 30 years later, seeing my mother's handwriting was like, oh my God, like it was like finding a magical treasure. And there's something about taking the time to write your penmanship, to fold it, to lick the envelope, to seal it, to stamp it, to go to the post, like however it gets there. There's something about that. Remember, to pay attention is, for me, is one of the great ways that we show love. And it's not about, again, making other people feel bad or wrong. I was just blown away by
You
that.
know, I think of the phrase, and again, I know a handful of the other writers who Oprah picked for her club, but many of them are dear friends, and I won't speak for any of them, and I don't know what, and it could also be, who am I to write to some big mogul? I mean,
Yeah.
even get it, but I want to talk about what you just described, which is, I think of the phrase, take care of yourself. What does it mean to take care of yourself? Well, don't drink too much, eat good food, get some exercise, try not to be too angry. I mean, don't smoke. I mean, all this stuff. But what's it mean to care for others? What you just described with that one handwritten thank you note to whomever is such an act of care, of
Mhm.
taking care of the relationship, of the person. And guess what? There's a bit of work to it. And one of the many things we've lost in the digital age is that sort of gesture that takes that you got to work to show that level of care.
So two things I want to just mention when you were talking about your students and how much you love them. Today, I got a message from David Maloney, one of your former students, because I told him I was interviewing you,
Oh,
and he's probably going to be on the podcast at some time. I'm not going to say probably; he is going to be on the podcast at some point. So David Maloney, who wrote Back a House, and he said, "Oh, this is so great! Have fun talking about you. He always gives me a boost of creative inspiration when I talk to him."
oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, well, so I mean, the thing is, it's like, but the reason why, what?
Excuse me, I got to plug Dave's book,
Okay,
Barker House by David Maloney. Beautiful, beautiful collection of link stories. Go get it. USA Bloomsbury Press.
I have mine downstairs. P.S. So, but that's part of it too, right? That's another one of the ways that writers show love, artists supporting artists, is we buy each other's books. And like, I have a platform. I'm like, I'm gonna let him come on and like hawk his wares, right? We want to talk stories and stuff like that. But my point being is that your students, I think, love you. There's a reason why. I've been on the boards. I see the commentary. People love you, and they do, because I think they can feel, and why David says that, right? He feels inspired every time he talks to you. Well, part of it is because he feels how much you actually care. We can feel as a kid who grew up the way, and again, look at, I'm still white. I still had privilege. I still, even though I was a white kind of poor kid, I get it. I had a leg up even above, right? Some of our brothers and sisters, people of color. But my point being is that, wait, where was I going with that? Oh,
Gifts other writers give each other.
yeah. I don't know. It'll come back to me if I'm supposed to say it. I think it was just, mm,
You're talking about because you care.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with it, but I want to circle back to something else that you said about like digital age, because I know it's kind of a bone in contention with you. It's something that I've heard you say so many times, and I repeat it to others, and I always give credit. You once told me that I give credit to a fault, but I do give credit all the time because I think where it's been earned, it's deserved. But you once said these devices, and I quote AD3, they are making us rude and stupid. And so I want to talk a little bit.
I actually think they're killing us before we're dead.
Have you watched the documentary The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
No,
Oh my God. All I can say is I watched it the other night. I felt a mix of rage, sadness. They're saying that since the invention of these, so basically it's a documentary where the people who created these platforms are talking about how they, like, at the time that they did it, they honestly, on some level, most of them didn't know what they were doing. They weren't thinking of the flip side of things.
they did not think of the social consequences whatsoever.
And now they're like, we don't let our kids have devices or go on social media. One guy said, I had to build a program to stop me from using my own program that I created because it's nefarious and evil. Another guy said, we knew exactly what we were doing and we did it anyways. But my point is that, you know, they were saying that young teenage girl, depression and suicide is up 300%.
Skyrocketed since 2012 when these things became ubiquitous. I call them crack gadgets. I love the internet. I love this laptop. I love that we can do this. I love the convenience of emails. I love my Google for research. I love YouTube. The invention of the handheld computer has been disastrous for so many people. I don't like social media. I don't like what it does mainly to young people, which is, you've heard me quote this, but I think it's made everyone the curator of the museum of me, especially young people who are already toxically self-involved. They're supposed to, they're adolescent, but times, a million now. And there's just so much that's harmful.
But let's tap into that though. Think about what you're saying. It's not saying, well, I get to, as a writer, right? We get to self-express, we get to be creative. We get to move things from the inside out. We get to share, right? Like Tolstoy, like you said, I always add on to that, like, another part of that section where he says, yes, art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. And what it does is it removes the perceived separation between the one who creates the art and the one who takes in the art. And what it's supposed to do is, like you said, to bring us closer together. And so I think with these devices, what they do is like exactly what you're talking about. It's like, it's a curation. It's not even like an expression. It's like, I'm going to piecemeal, right? These parts of me that I want you to see. I'm not going to go into the shadow. I'm not going to go into my imperfections. I'm going to literally become, I say, if it's not truth, it's theater. I'm going to perfect and perform and pretend.
And there's nothing wrong with theater, but what I hate about these gadgets and why I will never own one, and I have never sent a text, and I never will, and I lost my flip phone 2 months ago. It hasn't changed my life a bit. Is Mary Oliver from one of her poems. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. This whole talk's been about paying attention. What kills me is my students back in the world before the pandemic, I would say, you guys, these will never be allowed in my room, because if I've learned nothing in my life, I've learned that it goes like that. If you're lucky enough to live long, it still goes like that. And it breaks my heart that here are 18 young people in a room and no one's talking to each other. And what are you looking at? Instagram? You're looking at what some basketball player had for lunch? You're looking at someone's photo of a dog? There's someone next to you who could be engaging with and having a moment with. And so I find them heartbreaking. I've written an essay that I haven't shown you that I'm still working on. I don't even know if I'll put it out there, but it's not a rant. It's not a manifesto, because the digital horse has left the barn. These things are not going away. But the title of the essay is this: Anywhere But Here, Anyone But You. Mm-hmm. And that is what I hate about these things more than anything. Mm-hmm. It's robbed lovers and spouses of those moments with each other. It particularly breaks my heart when I see some young father walking. I've seen this so many times. I know you have too. Young father, mother walking a toddler down the road, holding his or her hand. I saw this happen, and the toddler was pointing to probably 2-year-old boy pointing to a squirrel or a chipmunk in the tree and said something about it. Dad's just scrolling through his phone. That kid, he just lost a divine moment with his child. That kid may have said the most brilliant, beautiful, totally particular thing about that squirrel or chipmunk, and daddy missed it, and it'll never happen again. And what the fuck did he find out? That LeBron James just liked somebody's fucking video?
Mm-hmm.
Breaks my heart. Nothing against LeBron James. He's a fine man.
So let's talk about this, because I think part of what is coming up for me is, I think I wanted to ask you this question, like, what's the role of the writer or the like Fontaine, your wife, who's a choreographer and a dancer and I think a painter too. She's another fellow creative, and I'm married to a professional musician, right? And like, thank God, like that's a whole other question around, has being married to another artist changed things? I can say definitely. It's been, thank God, amen. But one of the things I wanted to say is that, like, what's the role of the artists nowadays, right? Because I think part of it is to pay attention, and also to pay attention into, like you said, it's about, because you were saying, like, well, journalists, their job is to report, and the writer, its job is experience.
It's to capture. It's to capture.
To capture it, right? So yeah, what is the role of the writer and the artist in our world right now? Like, how can...
I don't think it's changed for a moment, but sadly, it's taken a back seat to these very addictive, time-sucking machines. And I know that, you know, my son Austin will fight with me on this and say, "Dad, you know how much I read on this? You know how better informed I am because of all the news I read on this?" And I know it's not all bad, and I know that not everybody who has an iPhone, I'll never call it a smartphone, but not everybody who has an iPhone in his hand is horribly addicted, although the average young person is on it 8 to 11 hours a day. Here's my thing. I think about Faulkner, and I'm paraphrasing a line of his. He said, but the job of the writer, and I would say of the artist, is to freeze time so that in 100 years, when the reader reads it, it moves again. The thing about these fucking gadgets is everybody is so, you become the machine. Well, what is the machine and what is the internet? The internet and the machine is all about distraction and this and this and that and this and that. And nobody is centered in their body in the moment right now in this moment. I could just walk to fucking stir my sauce, have a massive stroke and die.
Dude.
Thought I had this moment beforehand. I've been here. I'll be here when it happens. So the job of the writer is to freeze time so that 100 years when the reader reads it, it moves again. I think that is so beautiful. So how do you freeze time? You descend into story. And how do you do that? You do it through character. And how do you do that? You open yourself to receiving whomever is showing up, whether it's young 12-year-old Karen and Lawrence, or 15-year-old Andre in Haverhill, or, you know, a character in your novel or short story who just came from who knows where. And then the only way to excavate him or his or her experience or their experience, if they're gender fluid, is through authentic curiosity. What's it like? And this is from Mike Nichols, the film director. He was asked, you know, what's the question the storyteller has to ask? He said, well, it's not what the newspaper reporter asks. What the reporter asks is what happened. And what Nichols said is, it's not what happened, but what's it like? What's it really like to be in this thing that's happened? You know, sociologists, psychologists now have a term for what these things have done to us. Everybody's, and I'll never have one. I think I could actually get away with owning one. I don't think it would actually do the number on me that it can do on us because I have such a hatred for what it can do. But I will never own one for philosophical reasons. I will never own one. Imagine if I'm a pacifist, I'm never going to own a gun. So I will never own one for philosophical and moral reasons. I think they've hurt our humanity. Now, how can I descend into the now if I am, oh, here's the phrase from the psychologist, I got distracted. Everyone's walking around in a continuous state of partial attention,
Yes.
continuous partial attention, which robs us. Look, I said this to my creative writing students at UMass Lowell on Zoom on Monday. Might have been last week. I said, look, if I've learned nothing in my 61 years so far, I think I've learned the two things we're here to do. I think we're only here to do two things. I think I figured it out. One, we're supposed to do the thing that when we do it, we are more us than when we don't, as long as it's harmful to ourselves or others. It might be writing, it might be basket weaving, it might be carpentry, it might be plumbing, it might be being a mother or a father. I think that's part one, and you're lucky if you ever find it. Part two, and I think this is probably even more important, I think we're just here to love and be loved, to learn how to love others and to learn how to be loved back.
But this is what's so fascinating, Andre. Like, you don't consider yourself, I mean, I would never say you're a religious person, neither am I. And I don't have a problem with somebody thinking I'm a religious person because I talk about God and spirit all the time. But you are one of the most spiritual, non-owning spiritual people that I know. Like, this is what's so funny. This is exactly what I tell my spiritual mentoring clients. The questions we always ask, identity, we have an identity and a purpose problem. We're always like, who am I and why am I here? I'm like, who you are and what you are is love. Your only job then is to extend that love. And whether you do it as a janitor or a writer or a musician or a painter or a stay-at-home mom, or you're making, I'm like, you want to know how do you do it? I go, our only gig is to get better at giving and receiving love. Okay. That's me as a spiritual mentor. Sure. The right, you can't separate the two. The right is in there too, but you are actually wicked spiritual. Like, I always laugh when I talk to you because you're like, yeah, I don't believe. I'm like, dude,
Be a t-shirt, wicked spiritual.
well, wicked spiritual. But here's the other point I wanted to say about what you were just saying, because it's all about presence. It's all about being present. And the woman that a woman that I work with, her name is Marianne C., and she's a healer. She's an American living in Portugal. And her husband is also a musician, but he's also a retired somatic therapist. And Marianne had this incredible story. Like, I can't even go into it. I did a whole podcast episode with her about it. And one of the things she said to me, though, and I think it applies to writing also, is she says, information doesn't heal. Intimacy heals.
Yeah.
And I think being able to be close, like I said, to pay attention, to be in the wound, like to not stay there and set up camp and pitch a tent, right? But to be in the place with the 12-year-old Karen or the 15-year-old Andre or the whatever, right? And being able to just hold the space for that part of you to have its voice, to tell the story that it needs to tell.
Yeah, because that is the crack that Leonard Cohen wrote about, where the light gets in. You got to get in the crack. You know, I think about Virginia Satir. We've talked about her and her definition of emotional intimacy. Intimacy is my own ability to share with you my truth and your ability to reciprocate, right? And the key words there are ability, truth, and reciprocate. And we've all had the experience of, summoning the nerve to tell someone we love what we're really thinking and feeling, and getting a brick wall back.
Yeah.
It hurts. And if you've lived long enough and gotten lucky, you've all had the experience of swapping those truths, and you are more intimate. You can't help it. You may not stay married, you may not stay together, but you are closer in that moment than you were before. And so, I actually, and you know this from working with me in the classroom, that comes up for me. I will bring that up when we talk about creative writing, because our job as writers is to do part one. We just have to be as truthful and open and naked on the page as possible. We've got to plumb it. We've got to illuminate it. We've got to find it and shine it, no matter what happens. And it's up to the reader if he or she wants to show up for that. And it's frankly out of our hands.
I remember the first communication class I ever took at BU. And the very first day, the professor said, and it's never left me, they said, the message sent is not always the message received, because you're going to put something out there and it has to get through all the layers of the recipient's story, bias, prejudice, how they view themselves, the lens that they look at the world through. And they said, so you're not responsible, like you can't control how it lands and how it's received, but you are responsible for the intention in which you send the message. And I think that's kind of like what we're talking about here is like, and I just, oh my God, dude, I could like talk to you all day long, but I wanna just kind of wrap it up with like this final thing, which is, I know people who writers always ask these same questions, and I think there's something about this. So in my spiritual mentoring, there's a piece where I always talk about what I call the 5 Ds. And it's daily, dedication, determination, discipline, and devotion. And how the discipline ultimately moves us into freedom. And that's the devotion. Like when you're a kid, they make you brush your teeth, right? You do it because you have to. Eventually you start to do it because you know it's taking care of yourself, because it's good for you, right? You start to do things devotionally because you don't feel like yourself if you don't, right? And I think there's this, it's why I always talk about like writing is a spiritual practice. So can we kind of talk about just quickly touch upon like the discipline, what it takes to show up, to actually hold space, to write something. So a little bit about process and place, like where you write and what you do. I know I've been in your writing room and I know some of the things you do to prepare, but can we just talk about that? Maybe the ritual before you write?
Yeah. So I built a soundproof cave in my basement. It's 5 feet wide, 11 feet long, 6 feet only tall ceiling, little port window in the back, which I cover with a blanket. And I write at a plywood desk in front of a blank wall. And, I'll start the day reading a few poems to kind of light a candle to a more meditative state. Also, poets are writing better work than anybody else, and it inspires me, and it's condensed and beautiful and true. I read a lot of contemporary poets. And I've been doing that for a long time, years and years. And then I'll sharpen my pencils. I'll put on my headphones from my carpentry days, and I can just hear my heartbeat and my breath. And I sharpen my Blackwing 602 pencils.
Which look like this.
That's it. That's it.
I know.
And then I open my notebook and, oh, no, I'm missing a step. What I do now, in the last few years, I will type the previous day's handwritten work into the computer while listening to music. And then I will push it aside, do the poetry, sharpen the pencils, open the notebook, and try to dream. Richard Bausch famously said, if you think that you're thinking when you're writing, think again. You're much closer to the dreaming side of your mind. So dream it through. Now, what does that mean? It means let go and let them take over. Let go of control. So I do that until my concentration fades, 2.5, 3 hours tops when I'm composing from scratch. Then I go work out to clear my head and get back into my body. And then I don't let myself think about what I'm working on for 24 hours until the next morning, because I've learned to sort of sublimate it and kind of push it down into my subconscious where the dream world takes over. I don't talk about it to my wife. She's my soulmate, Fontaine. And like, I'll be working on a book for 5 years. She won't know one thing about it. Nothing. She won't know a thing. Nothing.
When I tell people that, they look at me like, what? I'm like, yeah, he considers it like being pregnant, man. You don't mess with the baby. Like it's in there.
Pregnant, and my job is just to get nutrients to that dark place. But I'm thinking about the word discipline. We talked about self-care earlier. Like, it's not discipline to brush your teeth. You wouldn't want to walk around with that taste in your mouth. We do it to take care of ourselves. We wouldn't think about wiping our asses, and we do that. That's not discipline. It's self-care. In the same way, it's self-care. The discipline the writer has is also self-care. But Karen, I'm thinking about the word discipline and the word in disciples.
Of course. Yes.
I don't know exactly what the root is, but the disciples are the followers of Jesus. And I do think that, so maybe discipline is nothing but following something larger than yourself.
But that's what, again, back to my...
Which is an act of devotion. And from hearing me talk ad nauseum over the years about creative writing, I do think, and not every writer is going to agree with me at all about this, but I believe it. I'm in my how many years I've been doing this? 38 straight years I've been writing. And I believe this more than I ever did. I think that writing is an act of humility where you're stepping into something larger than you are. And that is your God-given, universe-given, divine-given imagination. Every kid gets one, and it's larger than the kid. And that's where all the goodies are, all the angels and demons and everything in between. I was giving a talk maybe I think before the pandemic. I was in some Midwestern city, and this elderly black woman, probably in her late 80s, very just beautiful, vivacious, deep voiced lady, said, I was an accountant for years, and because I'm an accountant, it hurt my writing because all the I's and T's had to line up, all the columns had to be perfect. She said, only in the last few years, she said, have I learned to play in the gray. And I love that. I forget the woman's name, is like Reeve or something. I said, I'm going to quote you. And so that's what it's all about. It's about playing in the gray. So after 3 hours tops, really 2.5, when I'm just writing those first drafts, dreaming through the first drafts, then I go and work out, clear my head, and go back out the next day.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating because I think most people of a certain age or whatever can be like, I can't believe you write longhand still. I really believe that there's a different connection. Whatever. Again, plenty of writers can disagree with me. There are times when I sit down to jot something off quickly, and I'll do it on the computer. But I mean, I was a kid with a pencil in my hand and a notebook too, a Mead, like a regular little like cheap notebook or whatever. I think there's something powerful about moving from the head to the heart to the hand onto the page. And
You said it perfectly. The hand to the heart to the hand. I mean, the head to the heart to the hand. I think
yeah,
that's it.
and I think there's something really powerful about that. But yeah, so it's like that writing that you do first is all with your pencil and your notebook, and then the next day you transfer that, like you said, by writing it to music, and that's where it goes. But you don't edit it, right? You don't, or do you edit as you write with type it in, or are you transferring?
No, here's the thing. Then I'll turn off the music. I'll read what I typed, fix a few typos. If there's a really horrible sentence, like really clunky, I'll fix it. But I don't want to get too wrapped up in perfecting it too soon, because
Then you won't move forward either.
you've got to. There's a wonderful line from a great book called The Gift by Louis B. Hyde, he said the premature evaluation cuts off the flow.
The flow. See what I'm saying, Andre? You see what I'm saying?
Premature evaluation cuts off the flow. And here's the thing, too, and this is one of the shadows of fine art instruction, MFA programs, conferences like the great one we do down in Florida, Writers in Paradise, is one of the shadow sides of that experience is that it encourages its participants to prematurely anticipate an audience and prematurely anticipate what they're writing as a book. And that gets them to write too fast, to cut corners, to not go deeply enough, and to not get too messy. So I don't let myself clean it up so much that it's not messy. I want to keep it messy and keep it fractured and just keep trying to find where's the truth. If, however, I've written a scene that totally feels like bullshit the next day, I think, oh my God, that's totally made up. I just want to write about, booze or food or that woman. I can't go forward until I have to cut it and rewrite it till I believe it's true. Then I continue.
Well, because otherwise it feels gross, and you're full of shit. Like it's like this is bullshit.
Yeah, so it hurts your self-esteem, but also it feels like that deck of cards, that house of cards, you got a whole floor that
The
that is
foundation
totally
has termites.
got to get rid of that bad floor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
What?
I have to go finish my sauce.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Let's wrap it up. So I think that was a really beautiful place.
Another 5 hours, my friend. Believe me.
No. I too. I mean, people are only going to have so much like time to listen, but
Edit this thing down.
say that again.
Edit this down.
Yeah, I think that this has been just so fantastic and so amazing. And just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to others. And I think it's so helpful, right? There's so many people out there who have stories that they want to tell and they want to express themselves and they want to do it. And I think that, I mean, like I said, we could go on and on and on about social media and all this other stuff, but I just
Can I say one quick thing about social
Yes.
media and platforms is
That was my question. All right, I'm so glad it's like spiritual team on the job because that was the question I wanted to ask you.
I want to address that because, again, look, nothing's all bad. Well, rape and murder are all bad, but I mean that social media is not all bad. I know that there are a lot of isolated people who can find community on there, etc. What I will say, though, is I think if there's any one enemy to creativity, it's self-consciousness. Am I making that noise?
Yeah, something's dinging on your end. It might be your battery.
Yeah, I just plugged it in. Why is it doing that? You know what? Well, I'll fix it later. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
So I do believe that if there's any one enemy to human creativity, it is self-consciousness. There's a wonderful line, I'm sure you've heard me quote, from Nadine Gordimer, the Nobel Prize winner from South Africa, where in one of her novels, two middle-aged women are having coffee, and our protagonist has an insight as to what sincerity is while she's talking to her friend. And the line is, "Oh, sincerity is never having an idea of oneself," right? You don't have one eye in the mirror to see how you're doing. You're simply just present, totally doing it. So one of the things I find heartbreaking and challenging about social media and publishers, which really pisses me off, telling young writers they need a fucking platform.
Oh my God, that's my question right here.
So let me speak to that. Is it puts the writer in a toxically self-conscious state, which is antithetical to writing well. It does not help. I truly believe, and I said this to a class over the summer on Zoom, I say, I really believe that every day a writer should write as if he or she will be executed in the morning. I think we really need to write with everything every day, because we might be taken tomorrow. So let's write as truly as we can. Now, I get so goddamn angry at publishers. Look, my $27.50 hardcover that Karen was so sweet to buy, well, I got $2.70 of that. You go earn your goddamn $25 or $24.50. Your job's to make my work public. Your job's to remind people what they're doing. That's not the writer's job. It is not the writer's job to go get a Twitter account and a InstaChat, Snapagram. It's not the writer's job to do that, and it really pisses me off. And I know it's easy for me to say because I'm established and I don't have to do it now as much as I would if I were a first-time novelist. But I please, for every writer out there listening to this, I believe that publishers are abdicating their responsibility and they're part of the contract. Screw them. They can do it. You go write another book.
Okay, that is the final word. Thank you so much for saying that, because I wanted them to hear it, and I was like, oh, okay, we got to go. I'm not going to ask that one, but you circled back. See, that's the thing. Like, this is the part of we're all one. I believe that there's that one conscious mind too. And I think some part of your mind knew that some part of my mind was sending up the flare, and it was received. So just thank you so much, Andre. I love you so much.
I love you too, KK.
You guys who are listening, you can now hear why he is one of my favorite people on the planet. He's the real deal, and you are so special. And
likewise.
I'll just do a little shout out. We're gonna dedicate this episode to beloved Mary, your mother-in-law, who was your best friend. I don't want to speak for you, who recently passed. And if you guys follow me on social media, you saw the pictures I posted of Mary.
99 years old, lived with us for 15 years in this house, became one of my dearest friends. I talk to her every day. I tell her, please come haunt me, please. I'm waiting.
Yeah, she was something else. So Andre, just thank you for your time, brother. I love you. I appreciate you. I hope to see you in person soon, and give my love to Fontaine and the kids.
I will, and I will serve you some of this sauce, you and your talented man, Chris. One of these days when the shit's behind us.
All right, sweetheart. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Karen Kenney Show. I super duper appreciate your time, friendship, and support. And look, if something that I shared from my heart today somehow landed in yours, I'd love to hear about it. So please tag me on Facebook or Instagram or IG stories or wherever the cool kids are hanging out these days. and let me know what your favorite part was or what you found most helpful. You can find me over at Karen Kenney Live. That's Karen, KenneYlive. And if you're digging what I'm saying and you want to hear more, I'd be wicked grateful if you could go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review, because you guys, that's how you'll help me to keep spreading the love. And if you can think of someone that could benefit from hearing this episode, please share it with them. I'd also love to stay connected with you. So if the feeling is mutual, please go to KarenKenney.com/freebie and download my free guide to building your spiritual team. Until next time, my brothers and sisters, keep living in the fearless flow. Know that I see you, I appreciate you, and I love you. And wherever you go, may you be a blessing.